He had produced a whole load of them and brought them into the studio just in a plastic bag. They arranged the studio so that there were different tape recorders in different parts of the Abbey Road studio complex. And I was in a room with Peter Asher, and we were playing quite a long loop, which entailed holding a jam jar, and the loop went around the jam jar and then past the playback head and then over to, we had to keep it in tension. And I think there were 8 or maybe even 10 of us around the building, all standing, holding pencils or jam jars. And all of this information was going into the deck. And George Martin was just sitting there with his headphones, and whatever he did, of course, it's impossible to ever reproduce. That was it, that was the master, as soon as he pressed record. When I heard the playback, I mean, it was astonishing, actually. I thought, good God, this is the future.
The studio was an instrument. Once upon a time, it was just this almost invisible console that was just there to absorb what was being played on the floor. Now it was actually being used as an instrument, and it was more important than individual instruments in a way. This was unprecedented. And the other interesting thing about Tomorrow Never Knows, it was the first recording for Revolver. It was done in April '66. I mean, this is extraordinary. Tomorrow Never Knows is undoubtedly the most psychedelic song recorded at that period. There's nothing else like it. I mean, the word psychedelic wasn't really in popular parlance at all. It was the title of a book that John got from Indica Gallery.
Tomorrow Never Knows is definitely the world's first psychedelic track. The interesting thing is, of course, the Beatles were not only the world's most commercial band, but at that point they were also the world's most experimental band, which is very unusual.
That became clear when the Beatles' follow-up to Rubber Soul, Revolver, was issued in August 1966. Alongside Tomorrow Never Knows, the album's tracks were brimming with invention and originality. If Rubber Soul had suggested that pop music could be art, Revolver confirmed it.
Revolver really was the Beatles moving towards the fifth dimension. She said, I know what it's like to be dead. The Beatles, Lennon singing about, I know what it's like to be dead. What the hell is going on? Well, they'd been partying with birds in the West Coast and dropping acid by then. Drugs, we have a very negative view on them now in that you can be imprisoned by them. But in the mid-60s, I think, people felt it was the opposite. It was to loosen the chains of imprisonment, this single view of who you were. And then suddenly you had perspectives. And Revolver, you can hear it with all the different production sounds. It was all altered states and perspectives.
The idea was basically to turn rock and roll into a legitimate art form, and I think they did it. So many of the things they tried, from feedback and reverse tapes and sitars, whatever they did, all over the world, other bands immediately tried out. I mean, they were tremendous leaders. Brian Epstein was concerned that they were going too far ahead of their fan base. But they were very, very sensible at that. They always wanted to bring the fans along with them. They didn't want to become some kind of wild avant-garde band that only 150 people heard of.
Epstein's fears that the band would start to lose some of their audience were unfounded regarding their musical output, but would prove accurate in terms of their politics. With the Beatles' compositions expressing a more complex worldview, journalists began to ask them more significant questions. In a series of landmark interviews for British newspaper The Evening Standard, the individual band members were quizzed over their thoughts on current affairs. Lennon's frank opinions on Christianity proved uncontroversial upon their publication in Britain, yet when they were reprinted in America, the first scandal of the Beatles' career erupted, with a single quote becoming instantly infamous. "We're more popular than Jesus now."
First time anybody had asked John Lennon questions about his life and his philosophy, and it just passed without. But months later, one of those teenage magazines just printed that "We're bigger than Jesus," which caused a lot of problems. A lot of problems. Death threats and records being burnt and broken and smashed, and the Ku Klux Klan and concerts being cancelled. And it was very unpleasant for everyone.
Well, originally I was pointing out that fact in reference to England, that we meant more to kids than Jesus did, or religion at that time. I wasn't knocking it or putting it down, I was just saying it for the fact.
Lennon's, the Beatles are more popular than Jesus line, which even to me as a kid, I could see what he was saying. He wasn't saying, it's what he said in his quote unquote apology. Like, I wasn't saying we're better than Jesus. I wasn't saying it's good or it's bad. It's just it's true. And to me, it was absolutely true. It was unquestionable. There was such a backlash against them. It made you aware of some of the fault lines in American culture, or made you aware once again that what seemed maybe like a unified culture really wasn't. And it was harsh. It was scary.